The clock on the penthouse wall read 11:30 p.m. Park Jun-woo sat alone in the kind of darkness that devours sound. The only light came from the neon pulse of Manhattan bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, casting his silhouette in shades of electric blue and blood red. 60 stories below, the city he owned moved like a living organism, headlights snaking through gridlock, sirens wailing in distant neighborhoods, levers disappearing into doorways he could never enter. But up here, in this $15 million fortress of steel and glass, the silence pressed down like a physical force, squeezing the air from the room. Jun-woo sat on the edge of the black leather sofa, legs spread in a posture of territorial dominance, his tattooed fingers wrapped around a tumbler of whiskey he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. He wore a black button-down shirt, unbuttoned to mid-chest, revealing the intricate tapestry of ink that climbed his torso and throat, black and gray designs that weren't art, but armor. Each line covered a scar. Each scar told a story he refused to speak aloud. He checked his luxury silver watch for the 5th time, 11:32 p.m. Where the hell was she? His jaw clenched so hard his molars ached. Jun-woo was not a man who waited. He was a man who made others wait, who made grown men sweat in marble lobbies while he decided their fates. As the head of the Kang Syndicate, his name alone could empty a restaurant or fill a grave. Politicians returned his calls before their own mothers. Rival syndicates whispered his name like a curse. And yet here he sat, obsessed with the whereabouts of his housekeeper. The absurdity of it made his blood simmer with a rage he couldn't name. The elevator chimed. Jun-woo's entire body went still, every muscle locked into place like a predator catching scent of prey. He set down the whiskey without a sound and knelted deeper into the shadows, his dark eyes fixed on the entrance with laser precision. He didn't blink, he barely breathed. The door opened. Shirley Wilkes stepped inside, her fingers scrolling across her phone screen, completely absorbed in whatever world existed beyond these walls. She wore her traditional black and white maid's uniform with the crisp white apron and matching headband, but there was something about the way she carried herself, shoulders back, chin slightly raised, that suggested she was wearing armor of her own. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived things that would have broken weaker people. She took 3 steps into the penthouse before she felt it, that shift in the atmosphere, that electric charge that preceded violence or revelation. The air itself seemed to thicken. Shirley's thumb stopped mid-scroll. She looked up. Her entire body froze. Park Jun-woo sat in the darkness like a king on an invisible throne, the city lights behind him making him look less than human, something carved from obsidian and fury. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her forget the password to her phone, forget the lecture notes still fresh in her mind, forget everything except the primal instinct that screamed danger. "Working late tonight?" His voice sliced through the silence, controlled and cold, yet vibrating with something that sounded dangerously close to pain. It wasn't a question. Shirley's heart kicked against her ribs like it was trying to escape. Her mouth opened, but her throat had gone dry. She watched as Jun-woo rose to his full height, his lean, powerful frame seeming to expand until it consumed the entire room. He took 1 step toward her, then another. His footsteps echoed like a countdown to something inevitable. "I asked you a question, Miss Wilkes." His voice dropped lower, taking on that razor-edge quality that made seasoned criminals confess to crimes they didn't commit. His eyes, those dark, unreadable eyes, traveled across her face, searching for the lie he was convinced lived there. "Where were you?" Welcome to Afro Soul Storybook, and darling, you just crossed a threshold you can't uncross. This isn't some fairy tale romance where the prince saves the princess. This is blood and power wrapped in Armani suits. This is a legacy stolen and a woman ready to burn the world to take it back. Subscribe to watch more of our daily stories and comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far this storm is spreading, and hit that like button.
Shirley's fingers tightened around her phone. She could feel her pulse hammering in her temples, but she forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. Years of surviving Columbia's cutthroat academic environment had taught her one thing: never let them see you break. "I was out," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor threatening to crack through. "Running errands." Jun-woo's laugh was sharp and humorless, more blade than sound. He took another step closer, closing the distance between them until she could smell the whiskey on his breath and the expensive cologne that clung to his skin like a warning. "Errands." He repeated the word as if tasting it for poison. At 11:30 at night, on a Wednesday, for the third week in a row. Shirley's stomach dropped. He'd been tracking her movements, counting the days, building a case against her like she was some kind of criminal. "I have a life outside these walls, Mr. Park," she said, injecting steel into her voice even as her knees threatened to buckle. "You hired me to keep your home in order, not to account for every breath I take." Something flickered across Jun-woo's face. Surprise, maybe, or anger, she couldn't tell. Men like him weren't used to being challenged. In his world, defiance was answered with blood. He circled her slowly, a predator assessing weak points. "You think I don't notice patterns, Miss Wilkes? You think I built an empire by being blind?" His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt louder than shouting. "Every Wednesday and Friday, you disappear, 7 to 11, like clockwork. And you come back with that look on your face, like you've been somewhere that matters more than here." "Because it does," Shirley shot back before she could stop herself. The words hung in the air between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Jun-woo stopped moving, his eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. "What did you say?" Shirley's mind raced. She'd kept this secret for 6 months, kept her head down and her mouth shut, played the role of the invisible servant who saw nothing and said less. But standing here in the suffocating darkness of his penthouse, with his paranoia wrapping around her throat like hands, she realized the truth was going to come out one way or another. She could let him keep guessing, keep suspecting her of sins she hadn't committed, or she could rip the bandage off and face whatever came next. "I said it matters more than here," she repeated, lifting her chin. "Because unlike you, Mr. Park, I'm not hiding from the world. I'm trying to rejoin it." For 3 days, Jun-woo said nothing, but Shirley could feel his eyes on her constantly, tracking her movements through the penthouse, watching her through the security cameras he thought she didn't know about, calculating and recalculating whatever twisted equation he'd constructed in his mind. On Saturday morning, she found him sitting at the kitchen island when she came in to prepare breakfast. He was dressed in black slacks and a crisp white shirt, looking almost human in the morning light, if you ignored the predatory stillness in his posture. "Sit," he commanded without looking up from his phone. "Excuse me?" "I said sit." This time he did look up, and his expression was carved from stone. "We're going to have a conversation, Miss Wilkes, and for once you're going to tell me the truth." She could have refused, could have reminded him that she wasn't his prisoner, that employment didn't equal ownership, but something in his voice, not anger this time, but something raw, something that sounded almost like fear, made her close the refrigerator and sink into the chair across from him. Jun-woo slid a manila folder across the marble counter. Shirley stared at it like it might explode. "What is this?" "Open it." Her hands trembled as she lifted the cover. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Shirley walking into a building in Queens, Shirley leaving with textbooks under her arm, Shirley sitting in what was clearly a classroom, her hand raised to answer a question the camera couldn't capture. "You had me followed?" Shirley whispered, her voice hollow with disbelief. "You had me protected," Jun-woo corrected, his tone sharp. "There's a difference. Every Wednesday and Friday for 6 months, you've been going to the same location in a neighborhood I don't control. Do you understand what that means? Do you have any idea how many people would love to use you to get to me?" "I'm not," Shirley started, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "I know you're not meeting a lover. I know you're not selling information to my enemies. I know because if you were, you'd be smarter about it." He leaned back, his tattooed arms crossing over his chest. "What I don't know is why my housekeeper is sneaking off to Queen's College twice a week like her life depends on it." Shirley closed the folder with shaking hands. The anger that had been simmering beneath her fear suddenly ignited into something white-hot and uncontrollable.
"You want to know why?" Her voice rose, months of exhaustion and grief and barely suppressed rage pouring out in a torrent. "You want to know why I spend my nights in a classroom instead of sleeping? Why I work for a man I'm terrified of just to keep a roof over my head?" Jun-woo didn't move, but something in his expression shifted, the mask of cold control cracking just enough to reveal something human underneath. Shirley stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "My mother died 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer, stage 4. She held on for 18 months after diagnosis, long enough to see me finish my junior year at Columbia, long enough to make me promise I'd finish my degree." She watched Jun-woo's face, waiting for mockery or dismissal, but he just sat there, listening with an intensity that made her chest ache. "Do you know what an Ivy League education costs, Mr. Park? What happens when the scholarship student's mother dies and the medical bills eat through every cent of savings? When the student loans come due and the only job you can find that pays enough is cleaning penthouses for men who look at you like you're furniture?" Shirley's voice cracked, but she pushed through. "I was 6 credits from graduating, 6 credits from my degree in economics. I had job offers lined up, a future mapped out, a life that was supposed to mean something. And then my mother got sick, and I watched her waste away in a hospital bed she couldn't afford, and when she died, she left me with $70,000 in debt and a promise I didn't know how to keep." The silence that followed was deafening. Jun-woo stood slowly, his movements careful, as if he were approaching something fragile. "Queen's College," he said quietly. "You're finishing your degree." "1 class at a time," Shirley confirmed, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Financial management and corporate ethics. The only classes that fit my work schedule. It'll take me 2 more years at this rate, but I made a promise to my mother, to Gloria Brooks, and I don't break my promises." Something passed across Jun-woo's face, an emotion she couldn't name but recognized in the way his jaw tightened and his hands curled into fists at his sides. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Shirley laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Tell you what? That your housekeeper has dreams beyond dusting your priceless art collection? That the invisible woman who makes your bed and cooks your meals used to be somebody? Why would I tell you that, Mr. Park? What difference would it make?" "It makes all the difference," he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear him. The following Friday, Shirley returned to the Penthouse at her usual time, exhausted from a 3-hour lecture on derivative markets and portfolio theory. She expected darkness, expected Jun-woo to be out conducting whatever dark business kept the Kang Syndicate running. Instead, she found him waiting in the living room, and this time the lights were on. "Miss Wilkes," he said, standing, "may I see your textbook?" She blinked, confused. "What?" "Your textbook, from class tonight. I'd like to see it." Slowly, Shirley reached into her bag and pulled out the worn copy of Principles of Financial Management, 14th edition. She handed it to him, watching as he turned it over in his hands like it was some kind of artifact from another world. Jun-woo opened it to a random page, his eyes scanning the dense text on risk-adjusted returns and capital asset pricing models. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, not the cold, cruel smile she'd seen before, but something genuine. "You're studying portfolio management," he said. "Yes." "And corporate finance theory?" "Yes." He looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd started working for him, she saw something in his eyes that looked almost like respect. "I thought—" He stopped, shook his head. "It doesn't matter what I thought. I was wrong." Shirley didn't know what to say. Park Jun-woo, the man whose name made hardened criminals nervous, was standing in his penthouse holding her economics textbook and admitting he'd been wrong. The cognitive dissonance was almost painful. "Keep going to your classes, Miss Wilkes. I won't have you followed anymore. You have my word." "Thank you," she managed, though the words felt inadequate. Jun-woo nodded once, then turned towards the windows, his hands sliding into his pockets. "Your mother," he said without looking back. "Gloria. She must have been an extraordinary woman to raise someone like you." Shirley's throat tightened. "She was." "Then finish what you started, Miss Wilkes. Finish it for her." 2 weeks passed. The atmosphere in the penthouse shifted, became less suffocating. Jun-woo still maintained his distance, still moved through the space like a ghost, but the predatory edge had dulled. He asked about her classes sometimes, listened when she explained the complexities of modern portfolio theory with an attentiveness that unsettled her. It was almost like working for a normal person. Almost. Then came the Wednesday afternoon when Shirley arrived early to finish cleaning Jun-woo's home office before leaving for class. She was carrying fresh linens down the hall when she heard voices coming from the study, Jun-woo's low rumble, and another voice she recognized as Dorian, his second in command. "You're going soft, Jun." Dorian's voice carried that clinical coldness she'd always found disturbing. "The entire organization is talking about it. Park Jun-woo, afraid to make a move because he's worried about upsetting the help." "Watch your tongue," Jun-woo warned. "I'm serious. Ever since you stopped suspecting the girl, you've been distracted, sloppy. The Philadelphia Mortys are circling, and you're, what, asking about her college courses?" Shirley froze in the hallway, her heart pounding. "Shirley Wilkes is not your concern," Jun-woo said, ice in his voice. "She's exactly my concern when she's making you vulnerable," Dorian shot back. "You learned this lesson once already, or have you forgotten Yuna?" The name dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water, sending ripples of tension through the walls. "Don't," Jun-woo growled. "Don't say her name." "Why not? Because it reminds you what happens when you let someone get close, when you trust the wrong person?" Dorian's voice dropped. "Yuna almost killed you on your wedding night, Jun. She put a knife in your chest and left you bleeding on the floor. And now you're doing the same thing all over again with this woman. How long before she turns on you, too?" Shirley pressed her back against the wall, her mind racing. Wedding night, knife. The tattoos suddenly made horrifying sense. They weren't just armor, they were camouflage, covering scars that told a story of betrayal so deep it had nearly been fatal. "Shirley is nothing like Yuna," Jun-woo said quietly. "How do you know? Because she has sad eyes and a dead mother? Because she goes to night school?" Laughed Dorian, cruel and sharp. "Wake up. You're letting her in, and when she destroys you, don't say I didn't warn you." Footsteps approached the door. Shirley grabbed her linens and rushed toward the service stairs, her pulse thundering in her ears. She made it to the landing just as the study door opened, pressing herself into the shadows as Dorian strode past, his phone already pressed to his ear. She waited until his footsteps faded before allowing herself to breathe. Yuna, the woman who nearly killed Park Jun-woo, the ghost that haunted every decision he made, every wall he built, every person he kept at arm's length. And now Dorian thought Shirley was the next threat. She looked down at her hands, still clutching the linens, and realized they were shaking, not from fear this time, but from something else entirely, a bone-deep certainty that she had just heard something dangerous, something that changed everything. Dorian's voice carried the unmistakable tone of a man who wasn't warning his boss, he was threatening him. For 3 days, Shirley couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the penthouse. The air felt heavier, charged with the kind of tension that preceded storms. Jun-woo had left for Philadelphia on Thursday morning without a word, and in his absence, Dorian had taken to walking the halls like he owned them, his cold eyes tracking her movements with an intensity that made her skin crawl. On Saturday afternoon, Shirley returned to her quarters after finishing the weekly grocery run. She set down the bags and immediately knew something was wrong. The door to her small bedroom stood slightly ajar. She always closed it completely, a habit born from years of living in cramped dorm rooms where privacy was currency. Her pulse quickened as she pushed the door open. Everything looked normal at first glance. The bed was made exactly as she'd left it, her books stacked on the nightstand in the same precarious tower. But when she moved to hang up her jacket, her hand brushed against something in the closet that shouldn't have been there. A shoebox, plain brown, tucked behind her winter coats. Shirley pulled it out with trembling fingers. Inside, wrapped in a plastic bag, was a burner phone, the kind you bought with cash at convenience stores, the kind that couldn't be traced. Beneath it, held together with a rubber band, were stacks of $100 bills. She didn't need to count them to know there was at least $10,000. Her blood turned to ice. This was a setup. Someone had planted evidence in her room, and there was only one person who had both access and motive.
Shirley's mind raced through the implications. If Jun-woo found this, everything she told him would look like an elaborate lie. The night classes, her mother's death, her debt, all of it would seem like cover for something darker. He trusted her, opened up in the smallest of ways, and now someone was trying to destroy that fragile thread of connection. She thought of Dorian's voice in the study. How long before she turns on you too? This wasn't just about framing her. This was about proving Dorian right, about pushing Jun-woo back into the fortress of paranoia where Dorian could control him. Shirley shoved the box back into the closet and grabbed her phone. Her fingers hovered over Jun-woo's number, but she stopped. What could she say? Someone planted evidence in my room to frame me as a spy, but I swear I'm innocent. He'd heard that story before from people who actually were guilty. His past with Yuna had taught him to see betrayal in every shadow. No, she needed proof, real, undeniable evidence that Dorian was the threat, not her. And there was only one place that proof might exist. Jun-woo's private office occupied the southeast corner of the penthouse, sealed behind a biometric lock and enough security to guard a bank vault. Shirley had never been inside, had been explicitly told that the office was forbidden territory, the one space in the entire penthouse that remained off-limits even to her. But Jun-woo had also told her something else once, during a rare moment of vulnerability after she'd shared her mother's story. He'd been showing her how to operate the smart home system, and when they'd passed by the office, he'd said, "The code is my mother's birthday, April 27th. If something ever happens and you need to reach me, the emergency line is in there." At the time, she'd thought it was a strange thing to say, almost like he was preparing for a disaster. Now she understood. On some level, Park Jun-woo had known that the people closest to him were the most dangerous. It was just past midnight when Shirley made her decision. Jun-woo wouldn't return from Philadelphia until tomorrow evening. Dorian had left an hour ago, his car disappearing into the Manhattan night. The penthouse was silent, except for the hum of the climate control and the distant wail of sirens far below. She stood outside the office door, her heart slamming against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack bone. This was insane. If she was wrong about the code, alarms would trigger. If she was caught, there would be no explanation good enough to save her. But if she did nothing, Dorian's trap would close around her anyway. Shirley pressed her fingers to the keypad. 042.
727. The lock clicked. The door swung open. The office was smaller than she'd imagined, all dark wood and leather, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Jun-woo's desk dominated the space, a massive slab of black marble that looked more like an altar than furniture. 3 monitors glowed softly in the darkness, displaying security feeds from around the building. Shirley moved quickly, pulling open drawers and scanning through files with shaking hands. Financial records, contracts, photographs of people she didn't recognize. Nothing that screamed evidence of betrayal. Then she found the laptop. It was locked, password protected, but when she jiggled the mouse, the screen came alive, showing the last thing Jun-woo had been viewing, an encrypted messaging application, still logged in. The conversation thread was labeled simply D. Shirley scrolled through the messages, her blood turning colder with each line. The girl is becoming a problem. JW is distracted. I'll handle it, trust me. Make it look real. He needs to believe she's working for the Martys. Already done. Evidence planted. Give it 48 hours. The messages went back months, back before Jun-woo had even started suspecting her. Dorian hadn't been reacting to Jun-woo's trust in Shirley. He'd been systematically engineering her destruction from the beginning. But why? Shirley kept scrolling, and then she found it. A message from 3 weeks ago. Transfer complete. $2.3 million to offshore account. Philadelphia confirms receipt. Once JW is eliminated, the territory is yours. Her hands froze on the keyboard. Dorian wasn't just framing her to isolate Jun-woo, he was preparing to kill him. The Philadelphia Mortys weren't circling, they were already inside, had been inside for 3 years, feeding Dorian money and promises in exchange for delivering Jun-woo's empire on a silver platter. You know, a voice said from behind her, smooth and cold as a knife blade. Shirley spun around. Dorian stood in the doorway, a gun held loosely at his side. He looked almost bored, like he'd been expecting this, like he'd planned for this exact scenario. "Dorian," she started, but he cut her off with a shake of his head. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you didn't understand what you just read." He stepped into the office, closing the door behind him with a soft click. "I actually hoped you'd be smarter than this, Shirley. Hoped you'd take the fall quietly, maybe even run before Jun-woo got back. Would have been cleaner that way." "You're working for the Mortys," Shirley said, forcing her voice to stay steady even as her mind screamed at her to run. "You've been selling him out for 3 years." "Selling him out?" Dorian laughed, genuinely amused. "I've been keeping him alive. Park Jun-woo is a relic, Shirley, a dinosaur who thinks loyalty and honor still matter in this business. The Mortys understand what he doesn't, that empires aren't built on principles, they're built on adaptation, on knowing when to evolve." He raised the gun, not quite pointing it at her, but making the threat clear. Jun-woo stopped evolving the day Yuna tried to kill him. He sealed himself in this fortress and convinced himself that isolation was strength. But all he did was make himself predictable, easy to manage, easy to manipulate. "He trusted you," Shirley whispered. "He trusted Yuna too," Dorian countered. "Trust is a weakness. I learned that watching him bleed out on his wedding night. The strongest man I knew brought down by sentiment." His expression hardened. "I won't make that mistake." Shirley's eyes darted toward the door, calculating distances and angles. Dorian was blocking the main exit, but there was another door, a smaller one on the far side of the office that she'd noticed earlier. "Where does that lead?" she asked, stalling. "The panic room, but you're not going to reach it." Dorian raised the gun fully now, centering it on her chest. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to come with me quietly. We'll take a nice drive to Brooklyn, somewhere the security cameras don't reach. And when Jun-woo finds out his housekeeper disappeared the same night money went missing from his safe, well, he'll draw his own conclusions." "He'll know it was you," Shirley said, her hand slowly sliding toward the edge of the desk. "He'll figure it out. By then, it won't matter. The Mortys move on him in 72 hours. Jun-woo will be dead, and I'll be running the Kang Syndicate under new management." Dorian smiled, cold and clinical. I've spent 15 years building to this moment. You really think I'd leave loose ends? No, I don't. And then she grabbed the heavy crystal paperweight from Jun-woo's desk and hurled it at Dorian's face. The throw wasn't perfect. Her mother had always said her softball game needed work, but it was good enough. The crystal caught Dorian on the temple, sending him staggering backward with a curse. The gun wavered, and Shirley didn't wait to see where it pointed. She ran. Her fingers hit the panic room door handle just as the first gunshot cracked through the air, the bullet punching into the wall beside her. Shirley threw herself through the doorway and slammed her palm against the emergency seal button. Steel shutters dropped from the ceiling with a hydraulic hiss, cutting her off from Dorian's second shot. The panic room was barely larger than a closet, lined with monitors and emergency supplies. Shirley collapsed against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip her phone. She pulled it from her pocket and typed with trembling fingers. "Dorian, traitor, help." She hit send on Jun-woo's number and prayed he would see it in time. Park Jun-woo was 20 minutes outside Manhattan when his phone buzzed. He'd been in Philadelphia for 3 days, meeting with suppliers and ensuring the loyalty of contacts that Dorian had suggested might be wavering. It had been a productive trip, the kind that made him remember why he'd built this empire in the first place, the kind that made him feel like he still had control. Then he saw the message. 3 words that turned his blood to ice and his vision to red. "Dorian, traitor, help." Jun-woo's foot slammed on the accelerator. The armored Mercedes leaped forward, the speedometer climbing past 90, past 100, the city lights blurring into streams of gold and white. His phone was already pressed to his ear, calling the security team. "Full tactical response. Penthouse compromised. All units converge. I want Dorian alive if possible, dead if necessary. No one enters or leaves that building until I get there. Sir, we're 20 minutes out. Then drive faster." Jun-woo's mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Dorian, 15 years of brotherhood, 15 years of trust, and it had all been a lie. How long had he been planning this? How many times had Jun-woo's own second-in-command stood beside him while plotting his destruction? And Shirley, God, Shirley, she'd figured it out somehow, had gone into his office, the one place he'd told her she could access in an emergency, and uncovered the truth. Now she was trapped in the panic room with a traitor prowling outside, and Jun-woo was still 15 minutes away. He thought of Yuna, of the knife sliding between his ribs, of waking up in a pool of his own blood while the woman he loved stood over him with empty eyes. History was repeating itself, but this time the innocent party was in the danger. "Not again," Jun-woo growled, weaving through traffic at speeds that would have gotten anyone else arrested. Red lights meant nothing. Speed limits were suggestions. All that mattered was reaching her before Dorian did something irreversible. His phone rang. The head of security. "Sir, we have a situation. Dorian's attempting to breach the panic room. He's got cutting equipment. Estimate 10 minutes before he's through."
"I'm 5 minutes out. Do not let him reach her." "Understood." Jun-woo disconnected and pressed harder on the accelerator. The Mercedes screamed through the Manhattan streets, taking corners at angles that made the tires shriek in protest. He could see the Penthouse building now, its glass facade rising above the skyline like a finger pointing at the heavens, like a tombstone. "Hold on, Shirley," he whispered to the empty car. "Just hold on." The panic room door was shaking. Shirley could hear the high-pitched whine of power tools on the other side, metal grinding against reinforced steel. Dorian's voice drifted through, muffled but clear enough. "This door will fall eventually, Shirley. Save us both the trouble and open it." She didn't respond. Instead, she watched the security monitors, tracking the feeds from around the penthouse. 3 of Jun-woo's security team had arrived, spreading through the apartment in tactical formation. But Dorian had locked down the office level, sealed it with his own override codes. It was a race. Would Jun-woo arrive before Dorian cut through? Would the security team breach the doors before the panic room failed?
The monitor showing the building's entrance suddenly lit up with activity. A black Mercedes skidded to a halt in the circular drive, and Park Jun-woo emerged like something out of a nightmare, or a dream, depending on your perspective. He moved with lethal purpose, his face carved from stone, his tattooed throat flexing as he barked orders into his phone. Shirley's chest tightened with an emotion she couldn't name. The whine of the power tools grew louder. Sparks showered through the gap Dorian had carved in the door. 5 more minutes, maybe less. On the monitor, Jun-woo entered the building. Jun-woo took the stairs 6 at a time, his security team flanking him. The office level was locked down, but he had master overrides for everything in the building. His fingers flew across the keypad, punching in the emergency code that would blow every electronic lock in the penthouse. The doors opened with a pneumatic hiss. They found Dorian in Jun-woo's office, standing over the panic room door with a plasma torch in one hand and his gun in the other. The panic room's steel was glowing red, seconds from failure. "Step away from the door, Dorian," Jun-woo said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Behind him, 3 guards fanned out, their weapons trained. Dorian looked up slowly, and for a moment, Jun-woo saw something like regret flash across his face. Then it was gone, replaced with cold calculation. "You weren't supposed to get here this fast," Dorian said. "Lucky for Shirley, unlucky for you." Jun-woo took a step forward. 3 years, Dorian? 3 years you've been feeding my secrets to Philadelphia? Longer than that. I've been planning your downfall since the day Yuna failed. She had the right idea, just the wrong execution. You can't let sentiment rule an empire, Jun. I thought she taught you that. She taught me that trust is earned, not given freely. Jun-woo's eyes were black ice. I earned yours through blood and loyalty. What did the Mortys offer that was worth more? Evolution, Dorian said simply. A future where the Kang Syndicate doesn't die with your paranoia. The gun rose, not toward Jun-woo, but toward the panic room door, toward Shirley on the other side. "Drop the weapon," Jun-woo commanded. "Or what? You'll shoot your brother?" Dorian's smile was bitter. "We both know you won't. You're not my brother, not anymore." The gunshot echoed through the office, impossibly loud in the enclosed space. But it wasn't Dorian who fired. It was one of the security guards, a clean shot that struck Dorian's shoulder and sent his gun clattering across the floor. Dorian collapsed with a grunt of pain, his hand clutching the wound as blood seeped between his fingers. Jun-woo was already moving, crossing to the panic room and entering the manual override. The steel door slid open, revealing Shirley huddled inside, her eyes wide with shock, but her body intact. "Are you hurt?" Jun-woo demanded, his hands already checking her for injuries with surprising gentleness. "I'm fine. He was going to—" "I know." Jun-woo pulled her from the panic room, positioning his body between her and Dorian. Behind them, guards were securing Dorian, binding his wounds while reading him a litany of charges that would ensure he never saw daylight as a free man again.
Shirley looked at Jun-woo, really looked at him, and saw something she'd never expected. Fear. Raw, genuine terror that he'd almost lost someone who mattered. "How did you know?" she asked. "How did you know the message was real and not part of Dorian's frame job?" Jun-woo's jaw tightened. "Because you called him a traitor, not me. If Dorian had sent that message to prove you were working against me, he would have phrased it differently. But you," his voice roughened, "you were trying to warn me, protect me, even when it put you in danger. That's what people do when they care," Shirley said softly. Jun-woo's eyes met hers, and for the first time since she'd met him, the fortress walls cracked completely. "Yes," he said, "it is." 6 months later, Shirley stood in front of a wall of windows that looked identical to the ones in Jun-woo's penthouse, but the view was different. This was Columbia University's new Brooks Hall, a state-of-the-art building dedicated to supporting students from low-income backgrounds, students whose parents had sacrificed everything for their education, students who shouldn't have to choose between honoring the dead and building their own futures. The Gloria Brooks Foundation had opened its doors 3 months ago, funded by an anonymous donation of $10 million from a Manhattan businessman who preferred to remain out of the spotlight. Shirley adjusted the simple gold band on her finger, still new enough that she wasn't used to the weight, and turned to face the small crowd assembled for the ribbon cutting. University officials, donors, students whose faces reminded her painfully of her own reflection from 3 years ago. And Park Jun-woo, standing at the back in an impeccably tailored suit, his tattoos hidden beneath expensive fabric, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that still made her breath catch. They'd married quietly in a courthouse with only 2 witnesses. No ceremony, no reception, no guests who might demand explanations for how the head of the Kang Syndicate had fallen for his housekeeper. Just vows spoken in steady voices, and rings exchanged with shaking hands. "You don't have to do this," Jun-woo had told her the night before. "We can wait. Let the foundation establish itself. Let people forget the circumstances." But Shirley had taken his scarred hands in hers, the hands that had built an empire through violence and will, the hands that now signed checks to send strangers to college and said the thing she'd learned was truest about him. "We've both spent too much of our lives hiding. I'm done hiding." So here she stood, no longer invisible, no longer just the housekeeper with a secret. Shirley Wilkes Park, co-founder of the Gloria Brooks Foundation, 6 credits away from her economics degree, married to a man who was learning that walls could be windows if you had the courage to let the light in. Shirley caught Jun-woo's eye across the room. He nodded once, a small smile tugging at his mouth, the smile that still startled her when it appeared, genuine and unguarded. Shirley turned to the microphone and began to speak, telling the story of her mother, of debt and determination, of the invisible women who kept the world running while dreaming of something more. And in the back of the room, Park Jun-woo listened to his wife's voice and remembered what it felt like to step out of the darkness, to trust, to hope, to live instead of just survive. The foundation would help hundreds of students. Jun-woo had restructured his business empire, cutting ties with operations that relied on violence, investing in legitimate enterprises that wouldn't cost him his soul. Dorian was serving life in a federal facility, his testimony having brought down half of the Philadelphia Morty's leadership. The world hadn't ended when Jun-woo chose mercy over revenge, vulnerability over isolation. It had, in fact, just begun. As Shirley finished her speech to applause, Jun-woo moved through the crowd to stand beside her. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that 6 months ago would have seemed impossible. "Gloria would be proud," he said quietly, just for her. Shirley squeezed his hand, feeling the scars beneath his sleeve, the history written on his skin that he no longer had to face alone. "So would your mother," she replied. And together, no longer predator and prey, no longer boss and servant, but partners stepping into sunlight they'd both almost forgotten existed, faced the cameras and the future and the 1,000 small moments of trust that would build something neither of them had dared to imagine. A life where the hidden truth wasn't something to fear, but something to celebrate.